Hey everybody, so in this video we're going to be looking at algebra and specifically multiplying terms. So a term generally will look like a constant, a normal number, multiplied by a variable. So if we see two things written like this with no sign in between them, then that means they're being multiplied. So 7x there is an example, 14y is another example, minus 12ab is another example. Again, we have constants multiplied by algebraic variables. So before we actually look at multiplying out some examples, I first of all just want to explain what happens when we multiply two variables by each other. So let's say, for example, we start off with the variable a and we multiply it by another a. Well, a by a we'll often write as a squared. So anywhere that we're multiplying a variable by itself, we'll end up with a squared. Another example might be if we were to multiply a squared by a. Well, in this case, our a squared would be a times a, and we're multiplying it by another a. So you can see here I've underlined the a squared in red and the regular a by itself in green. And the end result for this would be a squared by a will give us a by a by a, which we can also just write as a cubed. It means we're multiplying a by itself 3 times. You may have covered this already in the indices topic, but it's also worth remembering any other example will follow a similar pattern. So for example, if we multiply a to the power of 5 by a to the power of 3, if we want to get this out, we could write them all out, or we could just add the powers. So that will give us a to the power of 8 in this example. So now that we've cleared up what happens when we multiply a term by itself or multiply it by a similar term that just has a different power, we can start looking at some examples of some more complicated multiplication. So the first example we'll look at is 5 multiplied by 2x. Now you'll see we have 2x written in a bracket here with the 5 outside. Sometimes in algebra it's easier to write multiplication with brackets instead of using the multiply by sign because we use x so commonly to represent an unknown variable. So here we've got two brackets around the 2x. That means that if there's anything written directly in front of it, we multiply the 2x by that. So here I'm multiplying 2x by 5. Now the trick in this question and in any other question that involves multiplying terms in algebra is if we have normal numbers or constants, we multiply them by each other. Then if we have variables, we multiply them by each other afterwards. So here we're just going to multiply our normal numbers by each other. So 5 multiplied by 2 here will just give us 10. And then step 2 would be to multiply the variables, or letters, but we actually only have one letter there, so we'll just keep that the same. So 5 times 2x became 10x. The next example we're going to look at is 2 multiplied by 3y to the power of 4. So again, in this example, we're going to multiply the constants by the constants, so 2 by 3, and then we'll multiply the variables afterwards. In this example, again, we only have one variable, so that's just going to be left alone. So constants by constants first, our 2 by our 3 gives us 6, and then the y to the power of 4 will just be left alone. The next example we'll look at, we actually have two variables this time. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated, but not by much. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply our constants, our minus 3 times our minus 5, and we're going to multiply our variables together. A place that we have to be careful not to make a mistake here is with the signs of the constants because they're both negatives. So we'll just keep in mind when we're doing it that a negative number times another negative number gives us a positive number. So if we multiply minus 5 by minus 3, well, a negative times a negative gives us a positive, and 5 times 3 gives us 15. Now, because it's positive, we don't have to write the sign here, although you could if you really wanted. Normally, we only write the sign if it's in negative. Then for b times b, we get b squared, like we discussed at the start of the video. Because b squared just means b multiplied by b. This question now is done. The last example we're going to look at, we have 2a times minus 3a squared. Again, we'll multiply the constants by the constants, being careful of this minus number here. Then we'll multiply the variables by the variables. So 2 times minus 3 is first. A positive times a negative gives us a negative, and 2 times 3 gives us 6. So 2 times minus 3 gives us minus 6. Next, we multiply the variables. So a times a squared. If it makes it easier to do this, you can imagine a having a little 1 next to it. So what we'll do if we're multiplying the same variable, a times a squared, is we can add these little powers. So that'll give us a to the power of 3.